My name's Chris Templeton, and I am with Influence Spotlights, and I am super pleased to have the opportunity to do my second set of interviews with Michael Fraidenberg. And in this instance, we're talking about his new book, Intelligent Courage, Natural Resource Careers That Make a Difference. And I can't imagine much that's more relevant to the state of this planet than people that are really wanting to make a difference in some really crazy times. I just watched the other night a piece on 60 Minutes about the loss of diversity in species on the planet and that sort of thing. So thank you for doing this, Mike. Talk a little bit about just what your intention was when you decided to write this book.
Well, it actually began about 2/3 of the way through my career, where, like most of the people around me, we started in our informal time together, just chatting about what did our careers mean. We had these wonderful conversations about what was the outcome that we wanted to achieve, and did we make it? What were the things we learned? And I really latched onto that last observation that people were asking us to talk about. What is it that we learned from our career? The more we talked about it, the more I realized there might be a theme there, and that theme is one that I've tried to capture in the book, and it's what did you learn from your career to make it a success that you did not learn in college? So it opened up this wonderful array of thinking about careers are learning experiences in and of themselves, and so the broader thinking is there's some valuable lessons learned there that have yet to be documented. So the attempt was, can we maybe talk to some role models, which is what I did, and ask them that question. Of course, I worded it in a variety of different ways, but what'd you learn in your career that you didn't learn in college that the next generation of professionals ought to know about? And we got into these wonderful conversations about what that means and then how to do it.
One of the things that really strikes me about that approach is I think so many people approach a career, and I think I hope it's different, and I'm pretty sure it is with this younger generation coming up now, where we started careers and we just did what we thought we should do. And yet I think one of the threads that's common through this book is that none of the 8 people that you interviewed thought to themselves, I'm just going to have a career and just kind of follow whatever I'm told to do. That's pretty much the opposite approach of how each of these 8 people approached what they did in natural resource management.
Yeah, that whole theme came out when I probed in the interviews and asked them, well, what made your career satisfying? So there were 2 elements popped up. One was what made your career a success, which is what we just talked about. The other was what made it a satisfying career for you. And over the theme came up as they tried to accomplish something specific with their career. They just didn't get into it and accept it as just a job that I'm going to. Of course, there were those kinds of elements, but these folks who were good role models went beyond that. And they said, wait a minute, I'm going to engage in my life energy in this work because I wanted to accomplish something that's important to me. And when I do that, I will feel satisfied. They didn't say it in those concise words, of course, but basically that's what they were saying. I want to be technically competent and successful that way, but I also want to create accomplishments that I can feel good about.
That they felt good about personally as opposed to accomplishments of what the job said they should do or their bosses said they should do. It wasn't that they weren't doing those things, but there was that bigger theme of, hey, what's important to me to accomplish where I feel purpose and I feel meaning in what I'm doing. Is that a fair characterization?
You bet. Absolutely perfect reflection there. It was not just about satisfying the boss or satisfying the tenets of the profession itself. And it really was about, can I create some kind of accomplishment that makes me feel contributive and a good citizen and somebody who's making a positive difference for the world?
One of the things that you have mentioned in our conversation is this idea of street smarts. And I think you roundabout alluded to it by talking about the things that we don't learn in college, but talk about the value of street smarts and how you define it, how these 8 people defined it in their careers.
You bet. There's sort of several themes that are woven together that are that learning that occurs that's outside of college that got the wrapper and the name street smarts around it. But it's basically those learnings that you get about how the world works that's different than the way it's supposed to work as you are perhaps taught in college or you get from textbooks. Here are some examples. First is just what is it about institutions that make them succeed or not succeed? So most people in natural resources work go to work for a government institution or a nonprofit institution. More and more they're getting into the private sector institutions. Well, those institutions in and of themselves have their own behavior patterns, their own reward systems, their own ideology, their own values. And so the idea of street smarts is knowing what is it that are the strengths of the institution you're working in and what are its weaknesses. So if you know that, then you can navigate through that in a much better way. Another element of street smarts that just spread through everybody's interview was the whole notion of how to work with people. I don't know, it's been a while since I've been to college, obviously, but when I was in college and the younger professionals that I presently know now who are still in the first third of their career are coming out of colleges with these superb educations in the technical wherewithal of their profession. But where they are short is in the elements of working with human beings. So, and I still have this frustration. I'm active in the American Fisheries Society, for example, and I go to these annual conferences that they have, and I'm still frustrated by them because they're just replete with these really elegant, well-crafted, well-thought-out scientific technical presentations and very little on sort of the human side of it. Fisheries and wildlife folks are getting a little better at that, but there's still some elements there. So the shorthand way I like to describe it is in terms of one of the big street smarts is to understand that scientific and technical expertise is a necessary but insufficient condition for success in these institutions. You need to know how to work with people. And I'll close with saying there's 2 kinds of work with people that are really important. One is just how we get along. So like if you and I are in a conflict over setting a fishing season or whether how to manage clean air in an air shed or something like that, I need to know how to work with you because we have a difference of opinion. So just that interpersonal and from me to a group kind of work. How do I work with a group that has a different orientation on the issue than I have? So that's sort of one element of street smarts with working with people. The second, and the really exciting one for me that's an untapped resource, if any of your viewers have an interest in this whole notion of the human dimensions of working with people and natural resources, the second element of street smarts is the most exciting one to me. And that's one that in the last interview in the book, we cover about what are human decision-making behaviors that are impediments to sustainability and the whole vast array of natural resources. Max Bazerman is the fellow that teaches at Harvard that was kind enough to give me that interview. And he opened his interview with this just absolutely fascinating question that captures that very eloquently, I think. He said that he's curious about why people say they want to leave the world better off for their children and their grandchildren than the world they received. Yet their behavior is not supportive of that desire. And as it turns out, there's repeatable, measurable human decision-making behaviors that are true impediments that sort of get in the way. And we can go into I can get way, way deep into the woods on these, but there basically are ways our brains behave that we don't think about. So there's instinctive behaviors that are not very functional sometimes. So people who are going to get really good and really elegant as the next generation of people working with natural resources are going to be the ones that understand how to work with people and understand human decision-making behavior. That's the path forward.
You know, one of the things that I think is so important to really talk about is, for me, one of the things that my wife in her career dealt with was institutional dysfunction. And I know a huge part of that is how I interact with people and how I perceive what's going on. And I think that so many of the people that we're talking to that want to be in natural resources are going to be in these kinds of institutions. And it feels to me like street smarts, like you said, it's about how I deal with people. But really, I also think that it goes back to one of the original points we talked about, was this idea of, boy, I better have something that's really important to me that helps me to stay on. I almost think that it's about what I want to accomplish, helps me stay on course and helps me not to get sidetracked by all the garbage that we face in a number of these organizations. Talk about that, would you?
I will. Help me out if I don't track your question
Sure.
entirely precisely, but what I'm hearing through my filters when you ask that is, what was the lodestone or the guiding star that these people used to pathfind and navigate in that direction? And again, I did not have to prompt these people when I was talking to them. Every one of the 8 people I interviewed volunteered that for them, the key guiding star or lodestone in their career was spending time thinking and reflecting deeply about what are my values that I want to bring to the table. And so they were values-driven career decisions. They weren't just jobs that these people did. That's tied closely, of course, to this whole notion that we talked about earlier about these people found a career to be satisfying because they found a way to accomplish something that was important to them. Behind that was a values orientation that said, this is an important value, and I'm willing to put some of my emotional and life energy into trying to achieve it. So it's good for that guiding force. It was also good for everybody that thinking and reflecting on values gave them a way to sort through difficult decisions, especially those that were challenging, about whether is this a right or a wrong kind of decision to make. So pre-thinking and maybe discussing with trusted friends and colleagues, and not letting a values choice creep up on you by surprise. They had pre-thought, well, what are my values here, and what is my personal behavior as a professional that's in sync with those values? They had some thought about what that looked like. And so when they came up to these difficult moments where they hit a wall and it was like, make this decision, but is it the right one? Well, that was helpful for them sorting out, well, what is the right decision for me? It wasn't always the right decision for their organization, for other people around them, but for them, it was important to know, am I fulfilling this sense of commitment that I have to my own value system?
And then in terms of my ability to communicate more effectively and to create a healthier environment, or an environment that's less laden with dysfunction, I imagine that's also was very helpful, because I keep being able to come back to my values and share them in a way that people can hear, versus defending what I think is right and pointing fingers that you're wrong and that sort of thing. I really would think that connection with what I want to achieve and the values that are important to me really informs how I communicate more effectively.
Yeah, it does. It gives you that sort of clarity about what I want to achieve, but when it comes time to try to guide others in that direction, you know how to say it. And one of the people I interviewed, Bern Shanks, talks about the importance of understanding, in his case, conservation history, because then he could get up when he wanted to advocate for a particular point of view or a particular direction that an issue ought to go. He had this really well-grounded sense of what's the historical thinking on those issues, and what are we at today with respect to that thinking, and where do we need to go into the future. There's almost nobody in these arguments these days that will bring to the table a discussion of that sort of more profound thinking about the history that we're involved in, and can we use that history as sort of a guide to help allow us to set a better direction for the future. So understanding that kind of evolution of your particular profession in that sense of what does a big topic like conservation mean was real important for him, for being that person who could be a spokesperson and speak clearly and succinctly to what is it that needs to happen next in that longer evolving history that still needs to be built upon.
And when I'm able to create those pictures for people, I'm also able to get them on board a whole lot easier, aren't I? You
are, and so there's a bit of persuasive communications that's involved here. So there was some of that learning by the people that we interviewed in the book about how you talk to people so that you can be persuasive, but it was still grounded in these fundamental values that are widely spread in our society. So it was kind of combining what needs to be said with how you say it or how you present it. And then a good shared diplomacy as well, because yes, some of the people found hard parts in their career where they needed to be a bit confrontational, but by and large, they were also diplomats. They knew how to guide a community forward. There's not a lot of people involved in this work that are good about speaking what is it that the community can do as a whole. So these people were community builders at the same time. And they did that with a sense of commitment to those communities, and they didn't disparage one faction versus another. They spent a lot of energy thinking, well, instead of refereeing communities that are at war over these issues, how do you build the network of the community back together so we can function together? They spent a lot of time and energy thinking about how to do that, and then a lot of work doing it. I will say there was some real strategy in that as well. Mike Dombeck is former chief of the Forest Service, who we interview in the book, had a nice way of saying how he sort of tried to sort through all of that. So when he got into the middle of one of these huge fights over what to do with the nation's land in the Forest Service, think about managing roadless areas in the national forests, old growth timber, those kinds of issues. He was good at all of those diplomacy skills and communication skills, but he was pretty strategic as well. And the advice he gave that I think is helpful broadly is that he would walk into one of these issues and his antennae would be up, and he'd be listening for three kinds of issues. He would listen for what are the red light issues in that community, those that there's just probably no hope of making progress on in the moment anyway. He would listen then for what are green light issues, those issues where there seems to be a large measure of consensus already, or at least it's evolving in that direction. So it's pretty strong hope that you can build some change solution that would be acceptable to everybody. And then he would listen for yellow light issues. Those are the issues that are in between. They're maybe starting to be talked about in a diplomatic kind of way, but people are still in fairly high order disagreement about them. And his strategic choice was to do exactly the same thing that your physician does in an emergency room and do triage on those issues. He would say, well, the red light issues are nothing we can work on right now, so we're going to parking lot or put them someplace. We're not going to forget them, but we're going to acknowledge that respectful people can respectfully disagree about some things. We're going to identify the green light issues, and then all we're going to do is start talking about implementation. We're going to start moving on those issues because they are ripe for forward progress. And then Mike would say, I'm going to spend considerable amount of my energy on the yellow light issues because those are the ones where we have some hope, at least in the near term. So we're going to start talking about what does it take to evolve cooperation? What does collaboration look like? And getting the parties to talk about what their needs are and values and those kinds of things. So that was a bit of interesting, specific tidbit advice that definitely resonated with me.
You know, one of the things that really hits me in regards to that is I think a lot of young bucks want to come in and make a big difference, and that is admirable. But if we, as those coming in to this type of work, aren't able to listen, to articulate different perspectives and to be able to draw out those red, yellow, and green light issues, we don't stand a chance, do we? I mean, it really is about, if you want to make the big changes that you want, it's about spending a whole lot of time listening, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. And listening is an art. I mean, these people had it in all over the place. You could tell when I was talking to them, much like I'm talking to you, they had really well crafted listening skills, and they could listen for what the context of what I was saying and what was going on underneath. And yes, I tried to ask my questions in a neutrally worded kind of way, but they were listening for what's the meaning of what I'm saying and not just reacting. And so, as you know, Chris, I'm a mediator as well. And when I'm mediating conflicts, you're always listening for what is being said. So what are people upset about? And that's usually where they name the issue. I don't like the cleanup standard. I don't like the fishing regulations. It's that kind of very definitive articulation of what is the specific problem. But a good listener is listening behind that to try to understand what's behind that issue that makes it so important to them. And so you're listening for what is behind the scenes that's not said. And you're digging for that, and you're validating, did you get it right? You're asking people. If people are upset, for example, about the imposition of a cleanup standard on whatever issue, if it's an oil leak or an air quality or whatever it is, it's good to listen to understand their specifics. They don't like the parts per million standard or whatever that is. But it's also good to probe and understand and ask the people, why is that important to you? And behind it will often be other issues, like they have a cash flow problem. They're worried about the bottom line for the next fiscal quarter. There might be a pride issue. They're worried about what their neighbors are going to say, or look, if it's a rancher, for example, what their neighbors are going to say about them if they give in to big government and allow some riparian zone repair or whatever that might be. So the listening is occurring at least at those two levels. What people are talking about, and then why it's important to them. And if you know why it's important to them, why things are important to them, you've got more material to work with. You don't have to use it, but you understand it, and you can use it if it's appropriate.
But boy, oh boy, if I have the ability to listen to those why reasons, I'm setting myself apart from the rest of the pack in terms of my ability to look at you in the face and say, my sense is that there's some bigger issues, and I'm wondering if it's X, Y, and Z. And having somebody hear you say that in a non-confrontational way and go, oh my God, you're right. That is a big part of this. Great. Now we can really focus on what some of the issues are that we need to address.
Handing you a hand, because that's an absolutely perfect way to ask it. That is a terrific role model of how you, as a person doing that probing, can behave with great deal of success in those situations.
So much of what we want to do to be successful requires listening. One of the things that we've talked about kind of around the edges is this idea of being in dysfunctional organizations. And one of the things that you and I spoke a little bit about is perseverance. Talk about perseverance and the role it plays, especially in dysfunctional organizations where we really want to make a change and we really want people to be on the same page.
Yeah, Roger Connor is a National Park Service professional that is interviewed in the book with many successes in his career, including setting up the World Heritage Conference on National Parks that actually spawned the whole worldwide network of those parks. Made that exact point. And I can't remember his exact words right now, but it's basically acknowledging that careers are long-term endeavors. And so if you're in it for the long haul and you don't get what you want, something in the moment, we'll cycle back to it later in your career. And so you've got this window of opportunity, which is whatever length of career that you have, don't squander it. Think about, if it's important to persevere on the issue, think about how you bring it back when the time is more right to do that. He tells the story of his experience setting up the first let it burn fire in the history of the National Park Service, at least the first one that was acknowledged by them. And that was an evolving issue about whether fires should be left to burn because their contribution to the natural landscape that's out there. Yet there was nothing that could be done because of the Smokey Bear mindset that when a fire broke out on any public land, we had to put it out immediately. Awful good reasons for that. There's, of course, fear and communities are involved. And, there's lots of good reasons to be vigorous about managing fires. But sometimes when the circumstances are right, a let it burn fire is an appropriate decision for a decision maker to make. And his story is about the evolution of that decision making and how it could happen in the institution that was basically hands off. We're going to reject that because it's just not what the community wants us to do. And oh, by the way, our values say it's the wrong thing to do. Fires are bad. Well, the evolving conversation and rethinking about is that the right value led to opening windows of opportunity about, well, could we try it someplace? From complete rejection to could we try it? That's a sign of perseverance, of persevering and saying, wait a minute, the working environment has now changed. The system might be ripe for a new change. And he was in the right place at the right time to give that a shot. And he managed it intelligently. Of course, he managed it well, so that in fact it happened and was a success. So I think that's one of the elements of perseverance, is you're in these careers for the long haul, and don't lose sight of these longer values and the longer goals you have. Be ready to cycle back and keep chipping away at them as it goes on.
And just to kind of wrap up the fires piece, because I think it's so important that people who aren't familiar with this concept understand, is that it turns out that it's a whole lot better to have regular little fires than to let all this fuel build up and then have the kind of fires that we've seen, in Australia and in California, among others, where, you instead have built up so much fuel that now you're destroying the whole forest, or, not destroying it, but creating a much longer recovery period versus the things that the forest is ready for, those regular fires. And I suppose that's instructional in terms of our careers too, isn't it?
Well, we have an instinct to put the career fires out, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we're in an interesting era with fire management in wildlands because, the fuel loading that you're talking about makes fires more frequent and more intense, so they're more dangerous fires. And the long drought period that we've been in, particularly here in the West, has made those fires even more dangerous. So there's an evolution of now rethinking about, well, what does safety mean in the context of balanced off against the ecological and long-term fire maintenance values that you're talking about. So it'll be interesting to monitor that conversation and see how those values evolve over time.
Well, and it's also a fabulous parallel in terms of how you approach your career. If you're starting as somebody who's new and thinks that this is where I want to be and this is how it has to happen, that's kind of the old school thinking. And instead be adaptive to what the situation is. And as you said earlier, there are going to be times that I need to put something on hold and come back to it. It really is an important kind of concept in terms of how I'm going to approach my career.
Yeah. The folks I talk to, and it's been my experience as well, so put a little of my personal material in here as well. This whole notion of perseverance and thinking like you just articulated about you're going to come back to these issues and keep chipping away at them. It was also a way to not get cynical about our jobs, because I've known plenty of people. My background, as you know, is fish and wildlife management. I've known plenty of people in the fish and wildlife, fish and wildlife managers who've gotten into the profession and didn't get what they wanted as fast as they wanted and as early as they wanted. And then they got cynical about their career and about the hope for achieving something positive. And so they gave up, basically. They were marching in place and drawing their paychecks, but they basically had given up on trying to create any lasting accomplishments from their career. This whole notion of perseverance is one way to not get trapped in that sort of cynical loop like that and stay optimistic and forward-looking and be in that sort of leadership role. Because whenever the issue comes up, you've thought about the next step instead of having to retract and undo your own cynicism and get ready for it. I know in my area where the Columbia River is this, huge river system that is historically important, but especially for salmon production of all different kinds of species of salmon, important to all kinds of communities, from the Aboriginal communities to communities today. And I know a lot of salmon biologists that have gotten pretty cynical about the ability to restore and rehabilitate salmon runs. Well, they're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy at that point. So it's a little challenging for me to ask when I am in a position. It's a little challenging me to ask them questions diplomatically about, if not staying optimistic and continuing to put positive proposals forward, if that's not the right course of action, what is? Is retreating into your own disappointment a better choice? That raises this whole question I know you've thought about the difference between active and passive decision making, which is another rabbit hole I like to go down into from time to time.
When I think about kind of the cynicism, one of the things that I think you alluded to it, but I think it's so important to talk about, is that cynicism that develops. And I think that not having the sense of what I want, the legacy that I want to leave, when that cynicism develops, I let go of that to some degree, and my behavior changes. Yes. The way that I perceive the world around me, the way that I interact with the people that are around me. And, I think one of the things we hear a lot of people say, well, just be positive. And I don't think that's what you were saying a moment ago. But authentically, we have to understand that when we're getting cynical, it's time for us, not the world around us, because the world is what it is, for us to do a reset. Isn't that the case from your standpoint?
Well, I would hope so. I mean, if we all can, these are pretty deep and emotionally laden sort of experiences that we're having. But if you don't do a reset like you're talking about, then you're trapped. There's not a way out. So you need to be mindful that you have that level of personal responsibility and hold yourself personally accountable for being that more positive force, and not be a bubble-headed optimist, because that's not what I'm saying, and that's not the solution. The solution is being a realist with the best idea for the next step, and not retreating into inaction because you're bitter and cynical and so forth. It helps you manage your own personal psychology, but like I said earlier, it also helps you in a leadership sense, because when the evolution of your issue has changed, everybody else is sort of still stuck they're in the stuck state. They've accepted the cynical status quo. And if you're continually thinking about what comes next, and you've got that perseverance and a bit of a positive attitude about it, then you're the first in line to offer a new way forward. So that positions you with considerable amount of leadership leverage that the other people who are kind of in that stuck state do not have.
And it gives you the ability to help bring those people along. Yeah. You're more likely to be the one that's going to bring those people along, and that makes your place in the leadership line that much more powerful, doesn't it?
It does, and it takes it back to Mike Dombeck's point in his triage issue of red light, yellow light, green light issues that position you as the person to be articulating what that next step is. So it gives you some strategic advantage as well.
And I think it also kind of dovetails into this idea of, as somebody who's doing this work that's so important, it's so critical not to be passive, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. There's a long theme in a couple of the interviews about the interviews in the book raised one of the most touchy subjects in the natural resource professions. And it is the question of, should a natural resource professional, whether you're a research scientist or a fish biologist or whatever it is, should the resource professional be an advocate? So let's just get that on the table. That's the core question that's here. And the interviews did a terrific job of sort of unpeeling that avocado. Is that the right metaphor here? Mm-hmm. And understanding what's going on behind that. So you can kind of understand is that really the most functional mental position to be in? And what the warp and weave of the interviews reveal is that for any profession, including the natural resources profession, any decision you make, even if it's a passive one, is still a decision. And so where are you better off, making an active, affirmative decision about trying to improve the future, or are you better off retreating to being more passive or being inactive and thereby making a passive decision you're not going to engage or you're not going to offer solutions? Both of those are decisions. One's just active and one is just passive. So you need to decide for yourself, where's your comfort zone? Do you want to be a passive decision maker or an active decision maker? Both are truly are decisions. The downside is, if you're a passive decision maker, implicitly what you're saying is the status quo is, in your judgment, the best option. Even if you don't like it, by being passive and not being affirmative about what the next step should be, you are accepting that the status quo is the best choice. And when I kind of get a little bit assertive with my fish and wildlife professional friends, and I ask them the question that way, they either cannot answer that question, or they talk about, well, maybe I am making a decision there. And then they'll give me a list of often really good reasons about why they are being passive. They're afraid about their job. They're afraid about what their peers and colleagues will say about them. There's a variety of different reasons like that to justify being passive on an issue that are pretty understandable. But nevertheless, you got in your own core and looking deeply at your own values, you've got to ask the question, am I really comfortable that the status quo is the best decision here?
And, having the ability to ask those kind of questions and look deeply, so much of the time, I think one of the words that you used a few times is fear. So much of being passive in our own careers tends to be fear-based, and in the long run, and usually in the short run, just doesn't serve us, does it?
No. It can serve us in the sense that if you need protection and you need security, then, yeah, it fulfills a different value that you have, and that can be important to you. But if you have a value about accomplishment in your professional career choice, you want your career to accomplish something, it's not serviceable for that accomplishment. So it's a difficult balancing act, and it's one of the more challenging moments in any career is balancing two goods. The good of being passive and maybe being providing higher level of security to my family versus the good of being more affirmative and creating some lasting change on the landscape or with an endangered species or whatever that might be.
And I think we can both agree that one of the messages you don't want anybody to take away is that there's an easy path. There's going to be difficulties no matter what, aren't there? There
is. And actually that, I guess I had some level of understanding about this, but not ability to articulate it until I talked to the 8 people in the book, is that can be a difficult path, but it is one made more difficult if you don't wrestle with it, because it grabs you and controls you instead of you trying to grab the decision and control it. And where you want to be in that comfort zone dialogue as well is kind of worth thinking about. Yeah, enough said on that, I think. I won't go too much deeper into that.
So here's what I have for notes. Use value as a guide for your career, your values. Taking action as opposed to being passive is very important, although I think we can both agree there are sometimes that being passive is the best course, hopefully short term and not the not the majority of how I live out my career. Have an adaptive approach to your career is the next thing I have. And having perseverance, so important. And I think the one that I take away as the biggest one is this concept of what is the legacy that I want to live, and how do I do that one step at a time?
Tom Peterson talks. He had the most diverse background education of any of the people that I talked to. He's got a resources degree and an MBA on business, and well educated in a diversity. And that was his point, is he wanted to be able to have multiple career choices. So if he got into an institution or a situation that was not providing him with a sufficiently satisfying career opportunity, he made a choice. He was going to actively choose a different job and go looking for someplace else that could provide him with a better opportunity. So that sort of adaptive response is worth thinking about as a career strategy, as opposed to my approach, which was to get into one agency and just plan to stay there my whole career. Mm-hmm. That might not be the best adaptive choice these days. It can work for many people, but if you want this career legacy value that you're talking about, that might not be the most serviceable choice.
When you look at what you've written, the interviews that you've done to create this book, what is it that you want people to take away from it?
Well, it's been a labor of love. I don't know if this shows up in the screen adequately,
sure does.
But it really is this whole notion of intelligent courage is something that we can articulate it as something that if you want to show courage, it's just another kind of job aspiration that you have. I think the biggest takeaway messages that I like to leave people with is that people that I interviewed who are really terrific role models, I think, and are successful by my standards, they designed their success by intent. They just didn't let it unroll by accident. So they were decidedly goal-oriented in what they wanted to achieve. And we've talked a lot about leaving a legacy and so forth. And yet that desire to succeed by intent wasn't completely clear at the first part of their career. That was an evolving decision that with the greater wisdom and more experience and thinking and reflection and reading, they got clearer, more clear about it by the ends of their career. I think another larger order lesson learned is that there's many pathways to a successful career. There's not a one-size-fits-all role model, and there shouldn't be, and there doesn't have to be. And that's, for me, a freeing concept, because people can plot their own pathway to that future that they want, because there's many ways to get to the legacy that people want to leave. I think, and really another big, larger lesson learned that I walked away from, giving me a sense of great hope and optimism, is that pathway, that career pathway, is open to anyone. You just need to decide you're going to get on that path, and you're going to keep working at it until you figure out what is the right solution for you adaptively as your career goes on. And then the last big order lesson learned in the book that I like to leave people with is that it really, for me, was an eye-opening and positive experience to talk to these people, to realize that they're people just like me, and that each of them made a big difference in their careers in their own arena. So it is true that one person can make a difference. Yeah, Phil Peaster in the desert ecosystem of California, saving several fish species from extinction. You have Tom Peterson working on spotted owls and preserving large chunks of real estate for old growth forests. You have Mike Dombeck changing the culture of a whole institution like the Forest Service from commodity production, think trees as lumber, to ecosystem values. You have Gloria Flora, who turned around big issues on mineral and gas exploration in the Rocky Mountain front. And curiously, I'll close with Andrea Mead Lawrence, who had the most tangential natural resource career of anybody. She was an Olympic ski champion, but was also a natural resources advocate who was a county commissioner in California. And as an Olympic ski champion, of course, I could not miss the opportunity to ask her to reflect on what does championship skills look like. So she goes into this great exploration of what does it take to be a champion in her chosen skill, which is downhill skiing, and then abstract that out. What are the transferable lessons learned to managing a career in natural resources? And just lots of tidbits of advice. The most impactful, two parts are most impactful to me. The first that I'll leave you with, and the first is that she said, that people who are succeeding in, who are what she called are masters of an activity like downhill skiing, do so because they don't just start that way, and they don't have unusually terrific talent that gets them from point A to championship in the next step. They incrementally improve, and they do it by, and this is her term of art that has hopefully resonance for your audience, is they do it by extension. So they use each experience, in her case, each race, for us it could be each issue that we engage in, to be a learning moment, a learning experience, so that she could extend herself and be better the next time. So that was the first of her two big points that resonated with me. The second was about her humility around her successes, because when I interviewed her in her condo in Mammoth, California, big ski resort town, I looked around her condominium, and there were no mementos of her racing career. No gold medals, no pictures, nothing like that. And so after 3 days of interviews, when the trust level had built up sufficiently, and I felt enough courage to ask her, why not? Why don't I see some gold medals and so forth? And she turned to me with this tidbit of advice that I'll leave your audience with. And she had this wonderful demeanor. She was very, very pointed and pretty kind of gruff sometimes, and very plain speaking. I asked her, why are there no mementos of your Olympic ski champion successes? And she turned to me and she said, Mike, a person's most important achievement is their next one.
I love that. I love that. You know, a couple of things that I'll wrap up with on my end. We didn't talk about it, although you mentioned the word art. The art of your career. Being street smart, from my standpoint, is about the art of your career, the art of the relationships that you create, the ability to look inside and decide I'm not going to be that cranky old guy who's always mad at the world and my job. So much of that is art. It's not a specific system that you can follow. It's art. And I look at this entire conversation, and we haven't talked about anything technical at all. Not to say it's not important, but when it comes right down to it, if I don't have this art that you've brought to Intelligent Courage, the book, I'm going to be somebody who's not going to go probably in the direction that I really want to. And I would encourage everybody that reads this book and thinks about what they're trying to accomplish in their career is to look at the part that is art. And that art is where the purpose and the meaning are. It's where we recognize how important things need to be for us to be important for the people and the issues that we want to cover. Michael Fraidenberg, you are the author of Intelligent Courage. Tell everybody where to find your books and this book, and tell everybody just briefly about your other book.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, thanks for the invitation. So the book is available on Amazon, and we've gone to special efforts to make it readily available. And so it's available in 3 formats. One is paperback, of course. I had it read by somebody who's a way better reader than I am as an audiobook. So that's available and actually entertaining, and it's available as an ebook as well. And thanks for the invitation about my other book. The other side of my life is, as you know, is about how to get groups that are not functioning very well to function better, therefore my mediation. But also I do a lot now of remote meetings. And so my other book that's available on Amazon is Mastering Online Meetings, and gives 52 tips for taking the drudge that everybody says are the crummy online meetings they're in these days, and do something about it and try to turn them into something that's more productive and a lot more fun.
And really well written.
Oh, well, thanks for that. So, Chris, it's just always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for this invitation. I really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. Michael Fraidenberg, Intelligent Courage, Natural Resource Careers That Make a Difference. Go out and make a difference. Read this book, and it'll help you to make an even bigger difference. Thank you so much for doing this.